The raging waters of the Sacramento River crashed against the old wooden bridge as Violet Evans clutched desperately at the splintering railing, her knuckles white with effort. It was 1876, and the spring floods had come early to Northern California, transforming the normally peaceful waterway into a roaring beast. One final crack of timber sealed her fate as the section of bridge beneath her feet gave way, sending her plummeting toward the churning waters below. "Help!" The word tore from her throat, barely audible above the river's roar. The cold water hit her like 1,000 needles, stealing her breath as the current immediately began dragging her downstream. Her heavy skirts became waterlogged anchors, pulling her under, despite her desperate thrashing. As darkness threatened to claim her consciousness, Violet glimpsed movement along the riverbank, a horse and rider appearing seemingly from nowhere, galloping alongside the current. The rider urged his mount into the shallows, leaning dangerously from his saddle as he extended his arm toward her. Strong fingers closed around her wrist just as she began to sink. With remarkable strength, he pulled her from the water's grip and toward him. "I've got you now," the cowboy said, his voice deep and steady as he maneuvered her onto his horse. Water streamed from her clothes and hair as she clung to him, shivering violently. Violet looked up at her rescuer through water-blurred eyes. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer sky. He guided his horse back to the shore, with one arm wrapped protectively around her waist. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "I thought I was done for." "Lucky I was riding by," he replied, dismounting in a fluid motion before helping her down. "Name's Cooper Walsh, and you are?" "Violet Evans," she said, wrapping her arms around herself as a chill wind cut through her soaked clothing. "I was crossing to Riverview when the bridge just collapsed." Cooper removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "That old bridge has been threatening to give out for years. Town council's been too busy arguing about who should pay for repairs." He looked back toward the river, where pieces of the broken bridge were being carried downstream. "Guess they'll have to decide now." "I need to get to Riverview," Violet said, glancing down at her ruined dress. "My aunt is expecting me. I'm meant to be staying with her while I—" She trailed off, unwilling to share the full story with this stranger. Cooper nodded toward his horse. "Timber and I can get you there, but you need dry clothes first. My cabin's not far. You can warm up there before we head into town." Violet hesitated. Going alone to a stranger's home went against everything she'd been taught about propriety, but the alternative was pneumonia or worse. "I'm obliged for your help, Mr. Walsh." "Just Cooper," he corrected, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight, Miss Evans. It's a bumpy ride." Cooper's cabin was modest but neat, situated on a small rise that offered a view of the rolling hills that surrounded Riverview. A corral stood beside it, empty save for a chestnut mare that whinnied a greeting to Timber as they approached. Inside, Cooper quickly built a fire in the stone hearth, while Violet stood dripping on the wooden floor, still wrapped in his coat. "I might have something that would fit you," he said, disappearing into a small back room. He returned with a simple button-down shirt and a pair of trousers that had been hemmed shorter than most men would wear. "My sister's," he explained, seeing her questioning look. "She stays here sometimes when she's passing through. There's a screen in the corner you can change behind." Gratefully, Violet took the dry clothes and moved behind the privacy screen. As she peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments, hanging them over the screen to dry, she considered her situation. Just yesterday she had been in San Francisco, fleeing a scandal not of her making. Her parents had hastily arranged for her to stay with her aunt in Riverview until the gossip died down. "How long have you lived out here?" she called, wanting to break the awkward silence as she changed. "Going on 5 years now," Cooper replied. "Came west after the war, looking for something different. Found this land, built this cabin, and haven't looked back." Violet emerged from behind the screen, feeling strange in men's clothing, but infinitely more comfortable. She'd managed to wring out her hair, which now hung in damp waves down her back. Cooper glanced up from the fire, his expression unreadable for a moment before he gestured to a chair. "Sit. You should warm up properly before we head to town." As Violet settled by the fire, Cooper busied himself making coffee. "So what brings a San Francisco lady to Riverview?" he asked. Violet's head snapped up. "How did you know I'm from San Francisco?" Cooper smiled slightly. Your dress was too fine for local work, and your accent, it's different, more refined. Violet looked down at her hands. I'm visiting my aunt, Martha Evans. She runs the millinery shop in town. Old Martha is your aunt? Cooper's eyebrows rose. She never mentioned family coming. It was arranged rather suddenly, Violet admitted. I needed to leave San Francisco quickly. Cooper handed her a tin mug of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. Trouble? Not of my making, she said firmly. I was engaged to be married to Leonard Taylor. His family owns the largest shipping company in San Francisco, but I discovered he had certain unsavory appetites. When I broke our engagement, he spread terrible rumors about me. Her voice shook slightly. He claimed I had been unfaithful, that I had been seen with other men. None of it true, but people believed him because of his position. My parents arranged for me to come here until the scandal subsides. Cooper's expression darkened. Men like that deserve a lesson in honor. It doesn't matter now, Violet said, though his indignation on her behalf warmed her more than the fire. I'm here to start fresh, even if only temporarily. They sat in companionable silence as the fire crackled and their coffee cooled. When Violet's clothes were dry enough to be wearable again, Cooper politely excused himself outside while she changed back into her dress. The ride into Riverview took less than an hour. Cooper kept his horse at an easy pace, mindful of the extra rider. As they entered the small town, Violet was struck by how different it was from San Francisco. Riverview consisted of one main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising at one end, and the promise of quiet anonymity that she desperately needed. Cooper reined timber to a stop in front of a shop with a window display of hats and ribbons. Martha's Millinery, he announced unnecessarily. Your aunt's place. Violet slid from the horse with Cooper's assistance, suddenly reluctant to part from her rescuer. How can I ever thank you? Cooper shook his head. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone would have ridden into a flooded river, Violet countered. You saved my life, Cooper Walsh. The door to the shop opened, and an older woman with gray-streaked brown hair stepped out, her eyes widening at the sight of Violet. Good heavens, child! You're a day early and looking like you've been through an ordeal. Violet embraced her aunt, whom she hadn't seen in years. The bridge collapsed while I was crossing it, she explained. Mr. Walsh here pulled me from the river. Martha Evans looked up at Cooper with newfound respect. Cooper Walsh, you say? Well, Mr. Walsh, it seems I'm in your debt. Cooper touched the brim of his hat. As I told your niece, madam, no debt necessary. Just glad I was there. Nonsense, Martha declared. You'll join us for supper tomorrow night. I insist. Before Cooper could protest further, Martha had ushered Violet inside, leaving him no choice but to accept the invitation with a nod before riding away. That man, Martha said as she helped Violet remove her damp coat, is one of the most respected ranchers in these parts, though you wouldn't know it to look at him. Started with almost nothing 5 years ago, and now runs one of the most successful small cattle operations in the county. Violet found herself staring after Cooper through the shop window. He didn't mention that. Martha chuckled. Of course not. Cooper Walsh isn't one to boast. Now, let's get you settled in. You can tell me everything over tea. That night, in the small bedroom above the millinery shop, Violet found herself unable to sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt the rush of the river, the terror of drowning, and then the security of Cooper's strong arms pulling her to safety. His eyes, blue as the California sky, seemed to follow her into her dreams when she finally drifted off. The next morning, Violet helped her aunt in the shop, grateful for the distraction. Martha's customers were curious about the newcomer from San Francisco, but thankfully, none seemed aware of the scandal she'd fled. By afternoon, Violet had learned to operate the cash register and was becoming familiar with Martha's inventory of hats, ribbons, and other accessories. You have a knack for this, Martha observed as Violet arranged a display of spring bonnets. Perhaps you should consider staying in Riverview longer than planned. Violet smiled non-committally. She couldn't deny the appeal of the small town's peaceful rhythm, so different from San Francisco's constant bustle. But she also couldn't imagine abandoning her parents and the life she'd known forever. As the shop's closing time approached, Martha sent Violet to the market to purchase ingredients for that evening's supper with Cooper. Walking down Riverview's main street, Violet was struck by how quickly the townspeople had accepted her presence, nodding or tipping their hats as she passed. At the general store, she was selecting vegetables when a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Violet joined the other customers at the window to see three men on horseback stopping in front of the bank across the street. Their faces were partially covered by bandanas. "Bank robbers," the store owner muttered, reaching under his counter for what Violet assumed was a weapon. "Get to the back of the store, folks." But before anyone could move, shots rang out. Violet watched in horror as the bank doors burst open and two more masked men emerged, bags in hand. They mounted waiting horses and the group galloped away, firing into the air as townspeople dove for cover. Sheriff Miller and his deputy emerged from the sheriff's office, firing after the retreating bandits, but it was too late. The robbers disappeared down the road, leading out of town. "That's the second time in a month," the store owner said grimly. "Those must be the Harlow brothers. They've been hitting small towns all across the territory." Shaken, Violet completed her purchases and hurried back to the millinery shop, where Martha was already locking the door, having heard the commotion. "Bank robbery," Violet explained, handing over the market basket. "Everyone's saying it was the Harlow brothers." Martha's expression grew serious. "Nasty bunch. Their father was hanged for murder 10 years back, and the son seemed determined to follow in his footsteps." She took the basket and gestured for Violet to follow her to the small apartment upstairs. "Let's get supper started. Cooper should be here soon." True to Martha's prediction, Cooper arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his usual worn leather vest. Violet felt a flutter in her stomach when he entered, his tall frame filling the doorway as he removed his hat. "Ladies," he greeted them, presenting Martha with a bottle of wine. "From my small vineyard, nothing fancy but drinkable." "You grow grapes as well as raise cattle?" Violet asked as they settled at the small dining table. Cooper smiled. "Just a hobby. My father was from Napa Valley originally. Taught me a thing or two before he passed." As they ate Martha's hearty beef stew, the conversation turned to the bank robbery. "Sheriff's organizing a posse to go after them," Cooper said, his expression serious. "Asked me to join. We ride out at first light." Martha frowned. "Those Harlow boys are dangerous, Cooper. They've killed before." "All the more reason to stop them," Cooper replied. He looked at Violet. "How are you settling in after yesterday's excitement?" "Well enough," Violet said, aware of Martha watching their interaction with interest. "Though I admit I'm still having nightmares about the river." Cooper's expression softened. "That'll fade with time. The mind has a way of healing itself, same as the body." After supper, while Martha busied herself with dessert, Cooper and Violet stood by the window overlooking the main street. "Did you really volunteer for the posse?" Violet asked quietly. Cooper nodded. "Someone has to stand up to men like the Harlows. Otherwise, they'll just keep taking what isn't theirs." "Like Leonard Taylor," Violet said without thinking. "Your former fiancé?" Cooper raised an eyebrow. "I suppose there are different ways of being a thief. Some steal money, others steal reputations." Violet was struck by the understanding in his eyes. Most men she'd known would have questioned her virtue upon hearing of broken engagement and rumors. Cooper seemed to accept her word without hesitation. "Please be careful tomorrow," she said, surprising herself with her concern for this man she barely knew. Cooper smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "I always am, Miss Evans." Martha returned with apple pie, and the moment between them passed. But throughout the remainder of the evening, Violet found herself watching Cooper, the way his hands moved as he spoke, the quiet authority in his voice, the respect with which he treated both women. When Cooper left that night, he promised to stop by when he returned from the posse. Violet found herself already counting the hours until she would see him again. The next 3 days passed slowly. Violet continued helping in the shop, learning more about the business and meeting more of Riverview's residents. Many mentioned Cooper, speaking highly of his character and his generosity to those in need. "He helped the Wilsons rebuild after that fire last summer," one customer told her. "Brought his ranch hands in and had a new barn up in 2 days." Another mentioned how Cooper had paid the school fees for the Peterson children after their father died in a mining accident. Each story added to the picture forming in Violet's mind, a man of quiet strength and unassuming kindness. On the fourth day, as Violet was sweeping the shop floor, the door opened to reveal Cooper, dusty from the trail but unharmed. Without thinking, she dropped the broom and rushed to him. "You're back!" The relief in her voice was unmistakable. Cooper's tired face broke into a smile. As promised, Martha emerged from the back room. "Did you catch them?" Cooper shook his head. "They split up. We caught 2 of the younger ones, but the 3 older Harlow brothers are still out there. Sheriff's bringing in the prisoners now." Martha insisted Cooper stay for dinner again, and this time Violet helped prepare the meal, conscious of Cooper watching her from his seat at the kitchen table as he recounted the posse's journey. After dinner, Cooper asked Violet if she'd like to take a walk. Martha's knowing smile as they left suggested she approved of the development. In the soft glow of twilight, Riverview took on a peaceful beauty. Cooper and Violet strolled toward the church at the end of the street, their conversation flowing easily. "Will you return to San Francisco once the gossip dies down?" Cooper asked. Violet considered the question. "I'm not sure anymore. I've only been here a few days, but there's something about Riverview that feels right." "It grows on you," Cooper agreed. "Though I imagine it's quite dull compared to city life. After bank robberies and bridge collapses." "Hardly dull," Violet laughed. Then, more seriously, "I've never felt so accepted. In San Francisco, everything was about appearances and connections. Here, people seem to care more about who you are than who your family is." Cooper stopped walking, turning to face her. "And who are you, Violet Evans, now that you're free of San Francisco's expectations?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think I'd like to find out." Cooper's expression was gentle in the fading light. "I'd like to help you discover that, if you'll let me." For a moment, Violet thought he might kiss her. Her heart raced at the prospect, but Cooper merely offered his arm again, and they continued their walk in a silence charged with possibility. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Cooper would ride into town every few days, ostensibly on ranch business, but always finding time to visit the millinery shop. Sometimes he and Violet would have lunch at the small restaurant next door, or take evening walks along the river, well away from the damaged bridge, which was now being rebuilt. Violet found herself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. Cooper was unlike any man she'd known in San Francisco. Where Leonard had been polished and proper on the surface, concealing a darker nature beneath, Cooper was straightforward and honest, his rough exterior housing a gentle heart. One sunny afternoon, Cooper arrived with an unusual invitation. "I thought you might like to see my ranch," he suggested. "If your aunt approves, of course." Martha not only approved, but practically pushed Violet out the door, packing a picnic basket and telling them to take their time. The ride to Cooper's ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. Spring was in full bloom, painting the landscape in vibrant colors. Timber seemed to know he was headed home, his pace quickening as they approached a cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. The main house was larger than Violet had expected, a substantial 2-story structure built of timber and stone. Several outbuildings, including a barn and bunkhouse, stood nearby. Men were working with cattle in the distance, and a woman was hanging laundry behind the bunkhouse. "It's beautiful," Violet said, as Cooper helped her dismount. "You've built all this in just 5 years?" "Had some help," Cooper admitted, "and a bit of luck. First cattle drive went well, and I was able to expand faster than planned." He gave her a tour of the property, introducing her to his foreman, Mike Daniels, and the ranch hands. The men tipped their hats respectfully, though Violet didn't miss the curious glances they exchanged. Clearly, Cooper didn't often bring visitors, especially female ones. They ate their picnic on a hill overlooking a creek that ran through Cooper's property. The spring sunshine warmed their skin as they talked about Cooper's plans for the ranch and Violet's growing interest in helping Martha expand the millinery business. "You're good with numbers," Cooper observed. "Martha says you've already reorganized her accounting system." Violet nodded, pleased he'd noticed. My father insisted I learn business principles even though, as a woman, I wasn't expected to use them. He always said knowledge never goes to waste. Smart man, Cooper said, leaning back on his elbows. This territory needs more people who understand that women are capable of more than society gives them credit for. Violet studied him curiously. That's a progressive view for a rancher. Cooper's expression grew distant. My sister, Rebecca, the one whose clothes you borrowed, she's a doctor in Sacramento. Fought tooth and nail for her education. Taught me a lot about not underestimating women. I'd like to meet her someday, Violet said. Cooper's smile returned. You will. She visits every few months. He sat up suddenly, pointing toward the creek. Look there. A deer and her fawn had emerged from the trees to drink from the water. They moved with delicate grace, unaware of the humans watching from a distance. This is why I came west, Cooper said quietly. Moments like this. The freedom to build something of my own, on my own terms. Violet understood completely. For the first time in her life, she too felt free to imagine a future of her own making. When Cooper rode her back to town that evening, something had shifted between them. A tentative understanding, unspoken, but real. I'll be busy with the cattle for the next week or so, Cooper said as they reached the millinery shop. Spring roundup time. Violet tried not to show her disappointment. I understand. The shop will be busy too. Martha has orders for Easter bonnets to complete. Cooper hesitated, then reached for her hand. When I'm done with roundup, I'd like to take you to the spring dance in Garnet Creek. It's a bigger town, about 20 miles from here. They have a proper dance hall. Violet's heart skipped. I'd like that very much. Cooper's smile was worth the week-long wait that followed. Violet threw herself into work at the millinery shop, learning to trim hats and even designing a few of her own that Martha pronounced quite stylish. In the evenings, she wrote letters to her parents, carefully edited to focus on the positive aspects of her new life, rather than the lingering pain of Leonard's betrayal. 10 days after their picnic, Cooper returned to town, looking tired but pleased. Roundup went well, he reported to Violet and Martha over supper at the small restaurant. Calving season was good to us this year. The spring dance was scheduled for the coming Saturday. Martha insisted on creating a new hat for Violet for the occasion, and brought out a dress she'd been saving for a special event, a lovely blue creation that complemented Violet's dark hair and fair complexion perfectly. Cooper won't know what hit him, Martha declared, as Violet tried on the outfit. The morning of the dance brought unexpected news. Sheriff Miller stopped by the shop, his expression grim. The Harlow brothers have been spotted near Garnet Creek, he informed them. Might want to reconsider attending that dance. Martha looked concerned, but Violet was determined not to let fear dictate her choices. We'll be careful, she promised the sheriff. Cooper will be with us. When Cooper arrived to collect them, driving a smart buggy rather than riding timber, Sheriff Miller repeated his warning. We'll keep our eyes open, Cooper assured him, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. But I'm not letting those outlaws ruin our evening. The ride to Garnet Creek was pleasant, with Cooper pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Martha sat beside Violet in the back of the buggy, occasionally giving knowing looks when Cooper's gaze lingered on Violet's profile. Garnet Creek was indeed larger than Riverview, boasting several saloons, a hotel, and the impressive dance hall where the spring event was being held. Lanterns hung from the eaves, casting a warm glow over the arriving couples. Inside, a small band was setting up on a stage at one end of the hall, and tables laden with food and punch lined the walls. Cooper seemed to know many people, introducing Violet and Martha to what felt like half the county. Violet was struck by the respect everyone showed him, and the genuine warmth in their greetings. When the music began, Cooper led Violet onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle, and he moved with surprising grace for such a tall man. You dance well for a rancher, Violet teased. Cooper grinned. My mother insisted, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a buffalo. As they circled the floor, Violet felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of the San Francisco scandal seemed distant here. Replaced by the simple joy of dancing with a man she was rapidly coming to care for deeply. The evening progressed pleasantly, with Cooper claiming most of Violet's dances. Martha was kept busy by several local widowers eager for her company, leaving the younger couple with precious moments alone. During a break in the music, Cooper led Violet outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, stars spangling the dark sky above them. "I have something to ask you," Cooper said, his voice unusually hesitant. Violet's pulse quickened. "Yes?" Before he could continue, shouting erupted from the direction of the bank down the street. Gunshots followed, and people began pouring out of the saloons and shops. "The Harlows!" someone yelled. "They're robbing the bank." Cooper's expression hardened. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "Get back inside with Martha." Before Violet could protest, he was running toward the commotion, joining other men who were moving to confront the robbers. Violet hurried back inside to find Martha, who was already gathering their belongings. "We need to leave," Martha insisted. "It's not safe." But Violet couldn't bear the thought of leaving Cooper. "We can't go without him." More gunshots echoed from the street. The dance hall had largely emptied as people fled, or the men joined the impromptu defense of the town. Violet and Martha moved to the window, peering out at the chaos. 3 masked men were backing toward their horses, firing at the townsmen who had formed a ragged line of defense. Violet spotted Cooper crouched behind a water trough, exchanging fire with the tallest robber. Suddenly, one of the outlaws spotted the women in the window. He raised his gun, and Violet yanked Martha down just as the glass shattered above them. "We need to move," Violet urged, pulling her aunt toward the back door. They emerged into an alley behind the dance hall, but their escape was cut short as one of the Harlow brothers appeared at the alley's entrance, clutching a bag that presumably contained the stolen money. "Well, well," he drawled, his face partially hidden by a bandana. "Looks like I found some hostages." Martha stepped in front of Violet protectively, but the outlaw simply shoved her aside, causing her to fall hard against the building wall. He grabbed Violet's arm, dragging her toward the street where his brothers were still exchanging gunfire with the townsmen. "I've got a hostage," he shouted. "Hold your fire, or she dies!" The shooting paused as everyone registered the situation. Violet struggled against her captor's grip, but he pressed his gun against her temple, effectively stilling her resistance. "Drop your weapons!" the outlaw demanded. Cooper stood slowly from behind the water trough, his expression murderous as he saw Violet in the outlaw's grip. "Let her go, Harlow. This is between you and the law." "Throw down your gun, Walsh," the outlaw, apparently the eldest Harlow brother, replied. "Or I'll put a bullet in your lady friend." Time seemed to slow as Cooper deliberately placed his revolver on the ground. The other townsmen reluctantly followed suit. "Now, back away," Harlow ordered. "All of you." As the men stepped back, Harlow began dragging Violet toward the waiting horses, where his brothers were already mounting up. Violet locked eyes with Cooper, seeing the barely contained fury and fear in his gaze. With a sudden, desperate inspiration, Violet went limp in her captor's arms, becoming dead weight. Surprised by the change, Harlow momentarily loosened his grip. It was all the opening Violet needed. She drove her elbow hard into his stomach, just as her father had taught her years ago, in case of emergency. Harlow doubled over, and Violet tore free of his grasp. Cooper moved with astonishing speed, tackling the outlaw before he could recover. They grappled in the street as the other Harlow brothers turned their horses to aid their sibling. Shots rang out from the rooftops. The sheriff and his deputies had positioned themselves above the street and now opened fire on the fleeing robbers. One fell from his horse, while the other spurred his mount to escape, abandoning his brothers. Cooper and the elder Harlow continued their struggle. Despite Cooper's strength, the outlaw managed to retrieve a knife from his boot and slashed wildly, catching Cooper's arm. Blood bloomed on his shirt, but Cooper didn't relent. With a powerful blow, he knocked Harlow unconscious just as the sheriff reached them. "You all right, Walsh?" Sheriff Miller asked, keeping his gun trained on the fallen outlaw. Cooper nodded, pressing his hand to his bleeding arm. His eyes sought Violet, who was rushing toward him, her face pale with fear. "You're hurt," she said, tears threatening as she saw the blood soaking his sleeve. "Just a scratch," Cooper assured her, though his grimace belied his words. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Violet shook her head, too overcome with relief to speak properly. Martha joined them, a bruise forming on her cheek where she'd struck the wall, but otherwise unharmed. The town doctor was summoned to treat Cooper's wound, which required several stitches, but was, as he'd claimed, not life-threatening. The Harlow brothers, 2 dead, 1 unconscious, were no longer a threat to the county. The missing brother would be hunted, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. As the doctor finished bandaging Cooper's arm, Violet sat beside him, still shaken by the evening's events. "You were going to ask me something," she said quietly, remembering their interrupted conversation. "Before all this happened." Cooper looked at her, his expression softening from grim determination to something warmer. "It can wait until we're back in Riverview, somewhere peaceful." The ride back was subdued, with Martha dozing in the back of the buggy, while Cooper, his injured arm in a sling, managed the reins with his good hand. Violet sat beside him, occasionally helping with the reins, but mostly watching his profile in the moonlight. "I never thanked you," she said after a long silence, "for standing up to Harlow." Cooper glanced at her. "You saved yourself, Violet. That was quick thinking with the elbow strike. My father insisted I learn basic self-defense," she explained. "Said a woman should know how to protect herself, especially one as headstrong as me." Cooper chuckled. "I'd like to meet your father someday. Thank him for raising such a remarkable daughter." The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Violet's heart beat faster at the implication that Cooper was thinking of a future where he would meet her family. They reached Riverview as dawn was breaking, the town still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in Garnet Creek. Cooper helped Martha and Violet down from the buggy, insisting on seeing them safely to their door despite his injury. Martha, displaying remarkable tact, mentioned a pressing need to check her inventory and disappeared inside, leaving Cooper and Violet alone on the small porch. "You never did tell me what you wanted to ask," Violet said, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. Cooper took her hand with his uninjured one. "I was going to ask if you might consider staying in Riverview permanently, not just because of what happened in San Francisco, but because you found something worth staying for." Violet's breath caught. "Are you something worth staying for, Cooper Walsh?" His blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'd like to be. I know it's fast. We've only known each other a short while. But from the moment I pulled you from that river, I've felt like I've known you my whole life." "I've got you now," Violet quoted softly, remembering his words on that fateful day. "You do," Cooper confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "If you want me." Violet closed the distance between them, standing on tiptoe to press her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, but filled with promise. "I do want you," she whispered against his mouth. "I think I have since that first day." Cooper's smile was brighter than the rising sun. "Then, I'll speak to your aunt about courting you properly, and when you're ready, I'll ask your father for your hand." "He'll ask about your prospects," Violet teased, her heart light with happiness. "I have a successful ranch, a small vineyard, and plans to expand both," Cooper replied with mock seriousness. "Will that satisfy him?" "It's not my father you need to satisfy," Violet reminded him, taking his hand. "And you've already won my heart." 1 year later, the rebuilt bridge over the Sacramento River stood strong against the spring current. Violet stood in the middle of it, leaning against the sturdy railing as she watched the water flow beneath her feet. "Still nervous about bridges?" Cooper asked, joining her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close against the spring breeze. Violet leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of the husband she'd married 6 months earlier. "Not when I'm with you? Though I'll never regret falling from that old bridge. Best mistake I ever made." Cooper laughed, the sound carrying across the water. "I'd ride into that river 100 times over to find you again." They walked hand in hand back toward Riverview, where Violet now ran the millinery shop while Martha enjoyed semi-retirement. Cooper's ranch had prospered, allowing them to build a smaller home in town where Violet could be close to the business while still spending weekends at the ranch. The scandal in San Francisco had faded into distant memory. Leonard Taylor had eventually been exposed for his true character when another young woman came forward with similar accusations. Violet's parents had visited for the wedding and were planning another trip soon to meet their first grandchild, due in the fall. "I got a letter from Rebecca today," Cooper mentioned as they neared town. "She's coming for a visit next month, wants to check on you and the baby." Violet smiled, placing a hand over her still flat stomach. "I look forward to finally meeting your sister," though I'm perfectly healthy." "She's a doctor. Worrying is part of her job," Cooper replied with a grin, "just as loving you is part of mine." As they entered Riverview, now their home in every sense of the word, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a broken engagement and a ruined reputation to a collapsed bridge and a daring rescue, every step had led her to Cooper and a happiness deeper than she'd ever imagined possible. "I've got you now," Cooper whispered, echoing his words from that first day as if reading her thoughts. "And I always will." Violet squeezed his hand, secure in the knowledge that sometimes falling was the best way to find solid ground. "And I've got you, cowboy, forever."